Diana Moore, 50 years old, entered the Franklin County courtroom with a cold arrogance, smirking at the family and friends of the woman she had killed, her own mother, Evelyn Moore. Confident that her composure and apparent intelligence would shield her from conviction, Diana treated the trial like a joke, unaware that every word she spoke was tightening the noose of justice around her. But the most decisive testimony did not come from a forensic expert or an investigating officer. It came from the only person who dared to speak the truth about her, her own son, who had once believed his mother was innocent. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the evening of November 18, 2008, darkness fell over the quiet suburban streets of Columbus, Ohio, bringing with it the harsh chill of approaching winter. Late-season leaves swirled in the wind, rustling across neatly trimmed lawns under the cold glow of pale yellow streetlights. Each house here was a small fortress of warmth and routine, where families were winding down from a long day, believing that a locked door was enough to keep the outside world at bay in the night. In a modest two-story home on Brookfield Drive, Evelyn Moore, 69 years old, was preparing for a peaceful evening like any other. The scent of baked waffles and afternoon coffee still lingered in the air. She was a retired nurse who had devoted over 40 years of her life to caring for patients at the local hospital. To her neighbors, she was the epitome of kindness and discipline, a woman who always smiled, always checked in, and always brought homemade pies to share during the holidays. She had lived in this house with her daughter and young granddaughter for nearly 2 decades. Her life a testament to the stability and simple goodness of America's Midwest. Outside, the neighborhood was so quiet, you could hear the wind slipping through wooden fences. That night, like any other, warm light spilled from the living room through the window. No one knew that this piece was merely a fragile veneer, hiding something waiting to shatter the community's sense of safety. Around 8 o'clock that evening, in that pale yellow house, an act of violence took place. There were no screams, no signs of a struggle, no hatred or argument, just a cold, senseless moment where life was taken without any reason that could explain it. The killing was not the result of anger or fear. It was the manifestation of a spiritual void, of pure malice without motive. An eruption of utter emptiness. Outside, the wind still blew across the rooftops, and the lives of neighbors went on, unaware that a crime had just occurred in their midst. 2 days later, the lights in the house were still on. The morning paper sat untouched on the driveway, and no one had seen Evelyn. Michael Grant, her grandson, tried calling multiple times, but was met with silence. By the morning of November 20th, he contacted the Columbus police to report his grandmother missing. The call was logged at 9:12 a.m., the first record of a case that no one in Columbus could have imagined would become one of the most horrific tragedies in the history of this peaceful neighborhood. When Columbus police arrived at Brookfield Drive that morning, the neighborhood was still cloaked in the quiet of early winter. A thin mist hung over white picket fences, wet lawns, and maple leaves clinging to the ground beneath patrol car tires. The house at 2145 looked like every other on the street. Curtains drawn, front door locked, mailbox stuffed with newspapers, and the living room lights still on, despite the morning hour. The first 2 officers, including Detective Rachel Owens, knocked repeatedly with no response. They circled to the back. The rear door was also locked, but the handle was wet, and a faint smell of cleaning solution hung in the cold air. Owens noted an odd feeling, a stillness not from absence, but from deliberate arrangement. After obtaining permission to enter, they stepped into a house still warm with human presence. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle, no displaced objects. Everything was clean to an uncanny degree, as if someone had just tried to erase something. The floors were damp, the kitchen counter gleamed, and the smell of bleach was so strong it overpowered the scent of wood and fabric. The living room was tidy. Family photos still hung neatly on the walls, Evelyn's kind smile in one picture looking down on everything below. Upstairs, the bed was made, windows closed, no signs of forced entry. The house had an eerie order, not like a place that had just experienced loss, but as if it had been cleaned for guests. Only when they reached the garage did the air shift. Owens noticed a heavy, oppressive smell rising from the far corner. The garage light cast a pale yellow glow, reflecting off the still wet cement floor. In the corner, among plastic bins and winter storage boxes, stood a large gray container, the kind typically used for holiday decorations. Its lid was sealed with tape, the edges showing wet stains. When an officer touched it, the cold temperature and liquid residue on his glove made him pause. Owens signaled for her partner to open the lid. The moment the lid came off, the room seemed to freeze. The smell of decay mixed with bleach flooded the space. Inside, beneath layers of towels and plastic bags, was the silver hair of a woman. Confirmation didn't take long. It was Evelyn Moore. Her body was carefully wrapped, neatly arranged, with no signs of haste. Police noted bloodstains that had seeped into the bottom of the container and pooled on the floor. Owens described the scene as chillingly orderly. Everything in the garage was arranged as if the cleaner wanted to hide the presence of death, not just its aftermath. There were no signs of a break-in, no missing items, no pried locks. This wasn't a botched robbery. All initial evidence pointed to the crime occurring within the house by someone the victim trusted most. But at this point, the police couldn't yet draw conclusions. All they knew was that Evelyn Moore had died in a setting without resistance, and someone had taken the time to wipe away every trace. News of the body's discovery quickly spread through the neighborhood. As ambulances and forensic teams arrived, residents gathered at the end of the street. They whispered, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. How could this happen in a place so peaceful? To them, Evelyn was the last person who could meet such a tragic end. She had helped neighbors with their kids, brought pies for holidays, and was always the first to check in when someone was struggling. The news that she had been killed in her own home left them stunned and afraid. That afternoon, yellow crime scene tape went up around the front yard, drawing the attention of local reporters. Columbus's 10 TV and the Dispatch ran stories about a body found in the Brookfield neighborhood, calling it an inexplicable tragedy in a safe suburb. The first images of the small, peaceful house, surrounded by police tape, appeared on the evening news. The community began to wonder if even Evelyn Moore, the kindest woman in the neighborhood, wasn't safe. Who could claim to be? In the days that followed, Brookfield Drive became a symbol of fear and loss. Houses that once left doors unlocked at night were now bolted shut. Children no longer played in yards after dark. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood that the line between safety and danger was thinner than they'd thought. From a quiet corner of the city, Columbus now had a new address in its crime files, and for those who knew Evelyn Moore, the world after that day would never be the same. The official investigation began on the morning of November 21st, one day after Evelyn Moore's body was found. The Columbus Police Department assigned a special task force led by Lieutenant Rachel Owens, focusing on two main angles: the victim's personal relationships and the possibility of an outside perpetrator. Officers began interviewing neighbors along Brookfield Drive, but no one reported anything unusual. No strangers had been seen in the area in the days before the crime, no suspicious cars had parked overnight, and no one heard any noises or cries for help. "This doesn't look like a break-in," Owens noted in her report. "No forced entry, no theft, no robbery. This crime happened quietly, inside a locked house." Investigators turned to Evelyn's family relationships. She lived only with her daughter, Diana Moore, and her young granddaughter. According to neighbors, the mother and daughter were often seen grocery shopping or gardening together, occasionally having minor arguments, but nothing serious. Diana was described as reserved, somewhat cold, and not very social with those around her. When contacted by police, she was cooperative, claiming her mother had gone to visit relatives in Toledo and didn't want to be disturbed. But this explanation quickly lost credibility when Owens checked contact records. Relatives in Toledo confirmed they hadn't seen Evelyn in years. A breakthrough came from the financial division of the investigation. The bank reported transactions from Evelyn's account continuing after her death. 2 cash withdrawals were made at an ATM 3 blocks from the house on November 19 and 20, when the body was already hidden in the garage. Police reviewed security footage, but the person withdrawing money wore a hood and mask, making identification difficult. There were also online payments for utilities and a series of text messages sent from Evelyn's phone to her grandson Michael, saying, "I'm fine, don't worry." Digital traces showed the messages were sent from the victim's phone while connected to the home's Wi-Fi on Brookfield Drive, meaning the phone never left the scene after Evelyn disappeared. When examining the victim's laptop, the tech team found 2 emails sent after November 18 to the bank and a medical supply store, signed with Evelyn's electronic signature. However, comparing the wording revealed stark differences, missing punctuation, spelling errors, and repetitive phrasing, unlike the meticulous style of a retired nurse. Signs of forgery were clear. Owens concluded that someone in the house had tried to create the impression that Evelyn was still alive to maintain her financial activity. From these findings, suspicion began to focus on Diana Moore. As the only other person living in the house, she had access to all of Evelyn's assets, accounts, and devices. When questioned about the bank transactions, Diana claimed she was just helping Mom pay bills and withdrew cash for her car insurance. But records showed the withdrawn funds weren't used for any purpose related to Evelyn. Moreover, her story kept changing. Initially, she insisted her mother was in Toledo. The next day, she said Evelyn had gone to the hospital for a checkup. When asked to provide the hospital's name, her answers were vague and inconsistent across interviews. Investigators gathered more physical evidence from a nearby department store. Transaction records showed that 3 days before the crime, Diana purchased a large plastic container, 2 bottles of bleach, a kitchen knife, and rubber gloves, all matching items found in the garage. She paid with her own credit card, the transaction clearly time-stamped. When confronted with the receipt, Diana claimed the items were for house cleaning, but a store employee recalled her shopping alone, dressed hurriedly, and not saying a word. These details began to paint a clear picture: a woman with direct access to the victim, a financial motive, and the time and means to cover her tracks. Chemical traces in the house indicated meticulous, planned cleaning. The estimated time of death coincided with when Diana was seen at home by neighbors. By the end of the week, with all financial, technical, and testimonial evidence compiled, Owens wrote in her preliminary report, "There is no evidence of involvement by any external individual. All findings point to the person living with the victim." The Columbus police officially named Diana Moore as the primary suspect in the Brookfield Drive killing. On the afternoon of November 25, 2008, after nearly a week of evidence collection, an arrest warrant for Diana Moore was issued. 2 police cars pulled up to 2145 Brookfield Drive. At 3:20 p.m. neighbors gathered at the end of the street, watching as the 50-year-old woman was handcuffed and led to the car without resistance. She wore a long gray coat, her face expressionless, eyes fixed forward, neither questioning nor speaking. According to the Columbus Police Department's report, Diana was brought to the interrogation room at 4:15 p.m. She was read her Miranda rights, acknowledged understanding them, but declined an attorney immediately, stating, "I have nothing to hide." In the first interrogation, Diana's demeanor was chillingly calm. When Detective Rachel Owens asked about the last time she saw her mother alive, Diana replied simply, "That evening, she went to bed early." She claimed ignorance about her mother's disappearance and feigned surprise upon hearing the body was found in the garage. "I don't know anything about that," she said, her voice flat. "I thought she went to a friend's house. I've just been cleaning the house these past few days." Owens began presenting evidence: traces of bleach on the floor, the receipt for the plastic container, knife and gloves, purchased with Diana's credit card 3 days before the murder. Faced with documents clearly dated, she maintained her expression. "I bought things to clean the storage," she said. "The plastic container was for my daughter's toys." When asked why the victim's bank account continued to be used for withdrawals and bill payments after her death, Diana shrugged. "My mother authorized me. I had her passwords. I was just following her wishes." The second part of the interrogation turned to forensic evidence. The coroner's report revealed that, in addition to a gunshot wound to the chest, Evelyn Moore's body had 2 deep stab wounds in the back, inflicted after she had collapsed. When asked about this, Diana paused for a long time. Owens noted in the record, she looked down at the table, pursed her lips, then looked up, calm as if considering an academic question. Finally, Diana said, "Maybe it was someone else. I don't know, people come and go in that house." When reminded there were no signs of a break-in, she shifted her tone. "Maybe it was an accident, maybe she fell on something. I don't know any more than that." Investigators continued, showing crime scene photos, including traces of cleaning on the kitchen floor and small bloodstains at the base of the stairs. Tests confirmed the blood matched the victim's. When Owens noted that the person cleaning missed a few spots, Diana showed no reaction, no angry denial, no panic, no defensive reflex. She only asked, "Can I smoke?" Her demeanor drew particular attention from the investigation team. A police psychologist, brought in to observe the recorded interrogation, assessed that Diana displayed prominent narcissistic personality traits, believing herself smarter than others, controlling the situation with feigned calmness, and showing no guilt or remorse. When directly challenged, she often responded with counter-questions. "Why would you think I did it? If it was me, why would I call the police?" Owens described this as a sophisticated linguistic defense, not an emotional one. About 2 hours later, as the interrogation continued with ATM footage, showing someone withdrawing money from Evelyn's account, Diana insisted it wasn't her. When shown a blurry image of a woman in a baseball cap, she said softly, "Someone who looks like me." Her voice remained steady, her gaze unwavering. Police revealed that DNA from the tape sealing the plastic container matched Diana's. This was the first direct physical evidence, yet when Owens presented this finding, Diana merely nodded, unresponsive. "So I was there," she said. "I cleaned the garage. I touch everything in that house. That doesn't mean I killed anyone." By the end of the session, her demeanor remained unchanged. Instead of showing worry or pleading, Diana seemed to observe the investigators as if she were evaluating them. Owens noted in her report, "This is one of the calmest suspects I've ever encountered. No trembling, no tears, no objections, no admissions, just emptiness." When the interrogation ended, Diana was transferred to a holding cell. The investigation team spent the rest of the day compiling materials, crime scene photos, forensic reports, purchase records, bank transactions, and witness statements. The completed report, over 200 pages long, concluded that financial, digital, and physical evidence all confirmed Diana Moore's direct involvement in Evelyn Moore's death. The psychologist's final assessment, included in the investigation file, stated, "The suspect exhibits traits of narcissistic personality disorder. She shows no remorse or fear, believing she can control the case's outcome and manipulate how others perceive the truth." The report ended with a note from Owens, "There is no indication that Diana Moore acknowledges the consequences of her actions. She views this as a test of power, and currently believes she remains in control of the narrative." On the afternoon of November 27, the entire case file was sent to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for prosecution. For the Columbus Police, the official investigation was complete. The case would now pass to those with a different task, to prove in court that Diana Moore's silence and cold smile could not conceal her guilt. When the Evelyn Moore case file reached the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office in late November 2008, it was quickly assigned to Laura Simmons, a veteran prosecutor specializing in family-related homicides. With over 15 years of experience, she was known for her meticulous investigative style, leaving no detail unchecked. Upon first reading the over 200-page report, Simmons recognized this was not a crime of passion. This death was structured, she noted in an internal memo. It was planned, executed in silence, and concealed with calculation. The initial charges proposed were first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and financial fraud, with first-degree murder carrying the maximum penalty of life imprisonment without parole. While building the case, Simmons requested a review of all forensic, financial, and digital evidence. The forensic report confirmed Evelyn's time of death as the night of November 18th, between 8 and 9 p.m. Crime scene analysis showed the victim was shot at close range, followed by 2 stab wounds to the back, likely inflicted to ensure her death. No signs of a struggle or defense were found, indicating the victim was attacked unexpectedly while off guard. On the financial side, Simmons had clear evidence: withdrawals, purchase receipts, and online transactions made from Evelyn's account after her death. Bank records showed Diana withdrew over $40,000 in the 2 months before and after the murder, mostly spent on luxury items and personal debt payments. Text analysis software from the State Bureau of Investigation confirmed that emails and texts sent from Evelyn's devices after November 18th were composed from Diana's computer, based on typing patterns and language habits. Simmons concluded, she didn't just kill her mother, she tried to live as her. The motive became clearer through family and friends' statements. According to those close to them, Evelyn and Diana's relationship had been strained for years over money. Evelyn often helped her daughter with debts, but recently wanted to cut off support and transfer her savings to her granddaughter. A close friend of the victim recalled Evelyn saying, "Diana won't grow up and can't be trusted anymore." For Simmons, this was key. The motive was not only financial, but also a desire to eliminate the influence and control of a mother Diana saw as obstructing her freedom. Meanwhile, the defense team, led by court-appointed attorney Robert Klein, represented Diana Moore. In January 2009, he filed an initial response, arguing that his client suffered from psychological disorders and lost control at the time of the incident. Klein cited Diana's history of depression treatment and sedative use, claiming her actions resulted from a spontaneous mental breakdown rather than premeditated murder. A request for a mental competency evaluation was submitted to Franklin County Court, and at the court's order, Diana was sent to Ohio's State Psychological Evaluation Center for 2 months. The results showed she was fully aware of her actions, ruling out the temporary loss of control claimed by the defense. Simmons continued to expand the investigation into financial fraud to strengthen the charges. Data analysts found Diana had forged her mother's signature on at least 3 documents: a request to change the address for pension payments, a payment authorization, and an email to the bank. This forgery began weeks before Evelyn's death, indicating an early intent to seize assets. In the court filing, the prosecutor described the process as a continuous series of actions, concealed under the guise of care and obedience. By late 2009, the case had drawn significant local media attention. Articles in the Columbus Dispatch and 10 TV News dubbed it the Brookfield case, a case that shocked the community because the victim was beloved and the accused was her own daughter. Under public pressure, the prosecutor's office opted for a public trial rather than a plea deal. Simmons stated in a brief press conference, "This is a case of the deepest betrayal, when evil doesn't come from outside, but grows within the home." In March 2010, the formal indictment was filed with 3 charges: first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and large-scale financial fraud, carrying a combined maximum penalty of life without parole. The defense continued to seek leniency based on psychological factors, but the court rejected this, citing insufficient grounds. On May 5, 2010, Franklin County Court approved the official trial schedule, setting the opening for June of that year. As the case file was sealed and sent to the court, Simmons made a final note in internal documents. "This is not a story of a woman who lost control. It's the story of a woman who believed she could erase all boundaries, even the one between life and death." For her, the Evelyn Moore case was not just a criminal indictment, but a testament to the collapse of a family bond consumed by greed and arrogance. At that point, all preparations were complete, and the confrontation between justice and a cold-blooded killer in Franklin County Court was only a matter of time. On June 10, 2010, the trial of Diana Moore officially opened at Franklin County Court in Columbus, Ohio. From early morning, news vans and reporters gathered outside the courthouse, setting up cameras and awaiting the defendant's arrival. The Brookfield murder had been a media focal point for months, not only for its brutality, but also for the relationship between victim and perpetrator. Headlines called it the killing that forced a city to question trust within families. Hundreds of locals lined up outside, hoping to attend, many of them former neighbors of Evelyn Moore. The courtroom atmosphere was both tense and curious, resembling a social event more than a typical trial. Around 8:30 a.m., Diana was brought into the courtroom. She wore a light gray blouse, her hair neatly tied back, her face lightly made up. Her demeanor was strikingly calm. As she passed the press row, she gave a faint but noticeable smile, as if acknowledging the flashing cameras. In that moment, reporters found the defining image of the case, the smile of a woman accused of killing her own mother. Within hours, the phrase "the smiling daughter" appeared across news broadcasts and headlines. Courtroom 3 at Franklin County was packed. On the left sat prosecutor Laura Simmons and her team. On the right, defense attorney Robert Klein. The front row of the gallery was reserved for the victim's family, including grandson Michael Grant, who had reported Evelyn missing. He sat silently, staring at the defendant's table. Behind him, reporters and the public filled the seats, while court staff worked to maintain order. The sound of Judge Edward Callahan's gavel marked the trial's start. The opening statement came from prosecutor Laura Simmons. She stepped to the podium, placed a thick case file on the table, scanned the gallery, then faced the jury of 8 women and 4 men. Her voice was clear, deliberate, and resolute. "We are here today to judge not just a murder but a betrayal of the deepest kind, a daughter who took the life of the mother who gave her life." She outlined the case. Evelyn Moore, a 69-year-old mother, killed in her home on the night of November 18, 2008. The perpetrator hid the body in the garage, forged texts and emails to mislead family. The motive was to seize assets and eliminate the victim's influence. Each sentence, each piece of evidence was presented carefully, making the courtroom atmosphere grow heavier. Simmons emphasized premeditation. She highlighted the planned actions: Diana's purchase of a plastic container, knife, and bleach before the murder, her withdrawals, forged emails, and crime scene cleanup afterward. "Nothing in this case was accidental," she said. "No outburst, no mistake, no mishap. Only cold calculation." As she paused, all eyes turned to the defendant. Diana sat upright, hands lightly clasped on the table, her gaze calm, seemingly unaffected. When defense attorney Robert Klein gave his opening statement, he took a starkly different approach. Speaking calmly, he portrayed his client as a psychologically troubled woman, under prolonged mental strain, who lost control at the time of the tragedy. "My client is not a monster," he said. "She is a damaged daughter who lived too long in her mother's shadow, and in a moment of desperation, acted without fully understanding the consequences." Klein urged the jury to listen with their hearts, not just their minds. As he spoke, Diana occasionally nodded slightly, even smiling when her name was mentioned. That fleeting smile was enough to unsettle some in the gallery. A Columbus Dispatch reporter wrote in that evening's story, "She behaved as if attending a presentation, not a murder trial." After the opening statements, Judge Callahan called a 15-minute recess before jury selection proceedings. The prosecution and defense reviewed backgrounds and questioned candidates, a process lasting nearly 3 hours. Simmons focused on selecting neutral jurors, unaffected by emotion, while Klein tried to exclude those with relatives in healthcare, a detail that might make them empathize with the victim. Ultimately, 12 primary jurors and 2 alternates were confirmed, mostly middle-aged, with stable careers and ties to Columbus. By late afternoon, with the jury seated, Judge Callahan confirmed the trial was ready to proceed. The courtroom fell silent, save for the rustle of papers and faint camera clicks. Before adjourning, the judge instructed all parties to strictly adhere to confidentiality and procedural rules. Diana turned to scan the gallery, her gaze sweeping the crowd, lingering briefly on a television camera lens. She tilted her head slightly and gave a small smile. Under the courtroom's fluorescent lights, that smile carried no trace of fatigue or fear, but an inexplicable confidence, the confidence of someone who believed she was still in control of the game. The first day closed with that image. Reporters left the courthouse with headlines already set. Evening news ran the same tagline: "The smiling daughter faces justice." For Columbus residents, the trial was no longer just a legal proceeding. It was a story of coldness, arrogance, and the cost of believing one could escape the consequences of a crime. On the morning of the second day, Courtroom 3 at Franklin County was again packed. Dozens of reporters arrived early, and the gallery had no empty seats. The atmosphere was different from the first day, less noisy, heavier, as if everyone knew what was coming would be unsettling. When Judge Callahan's gavel signaled the start, Prosecutor Laura Simmons stood and called the first witness, Lieutenant Rachel Owens, the lead investigator in the Evelyn Moore case. Owens took the stand in her police uniform, holding a thick case file. She spoke clearly, methodically, step by step. Her initial testimony recounted receiving the missing person report, discovering the crime scene, and finding the body in the garage. When she described opening the plastic container, the gallery fell silent, only the court clerk's pen audible. Owens emphasized that the scene showed no signs of a break-in, no evidence of a stranger, and that all evidence indicated the perpetrator had time, was unpressured, and acted in silence. Next, the prosecutor requested the display of crime scene photos. The large screen at the front of the courtroom lit up, showing a series of images from the night of November 20th, 2008. The garage bathed in yellow light, the gleaming concrete floor, the gray plastic container with taped edges and wet stains pooling on the ground. Some spectators bowed their heads, others covered their mouths, while reporters scribbled furiously. Diana sat upright at the defendant's table, her eyes following each image. She didn't look away or lower her gaze. When the final photo appeared, showing the body wrapped in layers of towels, a sharp gasp came from the back row. But Diana remained still, hands clasped on her lap, her expression blank. Owens continued, presenting the forensic findings. The cause of death was determined to be a gunshot wound at close range, fired directly into the chest. Subsequently, the victim sustained 2 stab wounds to the back, inflicted when she was no longer able to resist. She described the stab wounds as deep and precise, consistent with the kitchen knife found in the house. When Simmons asked if there was evidence of a struggle or defense, Owens replied, "None." The victim was attacked by surprise, likely while seated. The next segment focused on post-crime behavior. Police recovered traces of 2 different cleaning agents throughout the house, indicating systematic cleanup. Under ultraviolet light, they found minute blood specks under the staircase and on the hallway carpet missed during cleaning. In the laundry room, towels and clothing were found with traces of black powder, gunpowder residue. All had been washed multiple times, but still retained Evelyn's DNA. Owens detailed how the body was moved. Based on drag marks and imprints on the floor, the victim was moved from the living room to the garage. This process likely took several minutes and showed no signs of assistance from another person. She concluded, "Everything indicates the perpetrator knew exactly where items were in the house, how to access them, and how to handle the scene." The prosecutor then requested a short video clip from the surveillance camera at the store where Diana purchased the plastic container and bleach. On the screen, a woman in a dark coat with her hair tied back entered the store on the afternoon of November 15th, 3 days before the crime. The footage was blurry but clear enough for identification. When the video paused, Simmons asked Owens, "Was the person in the recording identified as the defendant Diana Moore?" "Yes, ma'am," Owens replied. "We confirmed it based on the transaction time and her credit card." Owens' entire testimony lasted nearly 2 hours, concluding that this was a deliberate act of murder, executed under complete control. When the judge allowed questions, defense attorney Robert Klein attempted to mitigate by asking if the victim's death could have been accidental, but Owens responded firmly, "There's no evidence of an accident. The nature of the wounds and the scene rules out that possibility." After Owens, the prosecutor called forensic pathologist Dr. Alan Becker, who conducted the autopsy. He confirmed the wounds were consistent with a small-caliber handgun found in the house. Becker explained that the victim showed signs of being attacked from behind after being shot, ruling out self-inflicted injury. He also noted the body was temporarily preserved in a cold environment, evidenced by slower decomposition than expected at room temperature. As Becker spoke, Diana sat silently, hands tightly clasped, eyes fixed on the screen. No one saw her blink when images of the wounds were displayed. A reporter noted, her face was completely still, as if this wasn't her own story. Occasionally, when Simmons mentioned her name, Diana's lips twitched slightly, whether a smile or a cold reflex was unclear. When the prosecutor concluded the morning's evidence, Judge Callahan called for a recess. As others stood, Diana remained seated, scanning the courtroom, as if observing an audience at a performance. Her composure became an immediate topic of discussion in the hallway outside. A 10 TV reporter whispered, "She looks like she's enjoying every minute." The afternoon session continued with additional testimony from the crime scene team. They presented physical evidence, the kitchen knife, rubber gloves, partially used bleach bottles, and DNA results. Simmons summarized, "There is no evidence that anyone other than Diana Moore was in the house the night the victim died." With that, she returned to the prosecution table and closed her file. The day's proceedings ended in silence. No one on the jury spoke, and many avoided looking at the defendant as they left the courtroom. Diana remained seated, eyes following each person, her lips curved into something close to a smile. She showed no fear, no anger, no remorse. If anything was evident, it was absolute confidence, a belief that she was still controlling the narrative, even as the evidence laid everything bare. On the third day of the trial, the courtroom atmosphere settled into a heavy, anticipatory silence. After 2 days of crime scene images and forensic testimony, the jury was visibly weary, and the public was filled with outrage. That morning, defense attorney Robert Klein took the stand to present Diana Moore's defense, hoping to shift the impression created by prosecutor Laura Simmons. He began with a calm, empathetic tone, attempting to humanize the woman sitting silently at the defendant's table. Klein described Diana as a daughter who lived too long in the shadow of a strong-willed mother, always feeling inadequate and dependent. He recounted how Evelyn was strict, perfectionist, and tightly controlled family matters, from finances to raising the granddaughter. It was a complex relationship of love and pressure, he said. Evelyn may have been a devoted mother, but she was also demanding, making her daughter feel constantly judged. According to Klein, Diana wasn't the cold-blooded killer the prosecution described, but a lonely middle-aged woman, mentally broken, overwhelmed by circumstances, and lacking support. The defense argued that the shooting on the night of November 18th was an accident, not intentional. Klein suggested that during a heated moment between mother and daughter, Evelyn's gun, an old handgun she kept for self-defense, accidentally discharged. "No one knows what happened in that moment," Klein said, turning to the jury. A 50-year-old woman, panicked, wounded, and in a few seconds of lost control, a tragedy occurred. He also explained the concealment of the body as a result of extreme panic, not calculation. She wasn't callous, he stressed. She was terrified, confused, and didn't know what to do. In that state, she did what desperate people do, tried to erase what couldn't be erased. As Klein spoke, Diana listened, hands neatly on the table, occasionally nodding slightly, as if affirming his words. In the back rows, many spectators remained skeptical. Reporters noted that Diana's smile didn't fade, even as her attorney spoke of panic and fear. Klein concluded his opening by appealing to compassion. "None of us are perfect. No one knows what they'd do in a moment of desperation. Look at her as a person, not a murderer, but a daughter who lost control in a fateful moment." Prosecutor Laura Simmons stood to rebut almost immediately. Her voice was clear, firm, not loud, but audible to every corner of the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, if this was an accident, it was an accident planned 3 days in advance." She held up a stack of documents containing receipts from Home Essentials, where Diana bought the plastic container, knife, and bleach. These items weren't purchased for cleaning, Simmons said, facing the jury, but to prepare for disposal. She presented technical evidence, forged emails and texts sent after Evelyn's death, composed on Diana's computer. This isn't the behavior of someone in panic, she said. This is the behavior of someone trying to maintain the illusion that the victim was still alive, to keep withdrawing money and controlling assets. As the evidence was reiterated, Diana maintained her posture, her face expressionless. A few times, she pressed her lips, as if suppressing a smile, prompting reporters to capture the moment for afternoon broadcasts, with captions like, "The defendant's smile chilled the courtroom." Simmons seized the opportunity. Looking directly at Diana, she said, "No one smiles when they accidentally kill their mother." The statement silenced the room for seconds, but the defendant remained unresponsive. Klein countered, arguing the prosecution was interpreting emotions to incriminate, and that everyone reacts differently to trauma. He reiterated Diana's diagnosed depression and use of anti-anxiety medication. However, Simmons quickly presented the Ohio State Psychological Evaluation Report, confirming the defendant was fully aware and in control of her actions. She concluded, "No disorder causes someone to plan purchases, kill their mother, forge messages, and spend the victim's money for weeks." The courtroom atmosphere grew thick. The jury remained silent, many taking notes. Diana sat still, eyes on the prosecution, her gaze inexplicably calm. Each time Simmons mentioned her name, her lips twitched slightly, as if enjoying how others recounted her story. By late morning, Judge Callahan called a recess. As reporters were allowed to leave, they filed stories with headlines like, "Defendant Still Smiles as Prosecution Reconstructs Crime." In commentary, one reporter wrote, "Diana Moore's smile has become the case's symbol, not of confidence, but of complete emptiness." When the court resumed in the afternoon, Klein requested to introduce evidence of Diana's mental health history and family dynamics, but the judge denied it, citing insufficient relevance to the time of the crime. All that remained of that day's trial was a stark contrast. One side's tight chain of evidence about planning and forgery versus the other's fragile defense based on emotion. Amid this contrast, Diana sat silently, occasionally tilting her head, her faint smile never fading. The fourth day of the trial was considered the most pivotal. After both sides presented all evidence and arguments, Judge Edward Callahan allowed direct examination between the prosecution, defense, and the defendant. The courtroom was packed. Extra folding chairs lined the aisles. The lighting was dimmed slightly to focus on the witness stand, where Diana Moore prepared to testify on her own behalf. She stood, walked slowly to the stand, her face unmade up, eyes clear and calm. When she raised her hand to swear the oath, her voice was steady. "I swear to tell the truth." Defense attorney Robert Klein began the questioning. He tried to steer Diana toward the image of a suppressed daughter, long-suffering mental strain. "Did you love your mother?" he asked. Diana replied without hesitation, "Yes, but she never let me live like an adult." The answer was brief, emotionless, but enough to draw the jury's attention. Klein continued, "Did you feel controlled by your mother? Since I was a child," she said, her voice even almost weary. "My mother always said I was a burden, that I never did anything right. My whole life, I had to follow her. How to dress, my job, everything." Klein nodded, pacing the testimony. "So that night, what caused the argument with your mother?" Diana looked up, gazing into the distance. "She called me a failure, said I could never take care of my daughter. I couldn't take it anymore. I just wanted her to stop talking." A brief silence enveloped the room. Klein stepped back, asking softly, "Did you intend to harm your mother?" Diana answered, "No, I just wanted her to stop. I don't know why it happened so fast. I just lost control." Her voice was low but clear, no trembling, no tears. Some in the courtroom exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe or doubt. Klein turned to the judge. "Your Honor, my client doesn't deny the incident. She only says it wasn't intentional." Prosecutor Laura Simmons stood, approaching the stand slowly. Her voice was low, firm. "Miss Moore, You say you lost control, but 3 days before the incident, you bought a plastic container, a knife, and bleach. Can you explain that? Diana met her gaze, unflinching. I bought them to clean the house. I had no other intentions. Simmons pressed. You planned to clean with a kitchen knife and industrial bleach, and coincidentally, that container ended up holding your mother's body. Diana paused for a few seconds, then said, I don't remember everything. It's all blurry. Simmons took a step closer, her voice sharper. After your mother died, you sent texts impersonating her, didn't you? I just didn't want anyone to worry. You didn't want anyone to worry, or you didn't want them to find out? You withdrew money from her account, didn't you? Diana tilted her head slightly, speaking slowly. I needed money to pay debts, but I planned to pay it back. The response drew murmurs from the courtroom. Simmons didn't stop. You planned to pay back the person you killed? Do you see the contradiction in that? Diana looked straight ahead, a faint smile forming. Everyone makes mistakes, she said, chillingly calm. The courtroom tension spiked. Judge Callahan tapped his gavel to restore order. Simmons lowered her voice, each word clear. Miss Moore, you say you lost control. But losing control doesn't make someone clean a crime scene. Wrap a body in a container, seal it with tape, send fake emails, and spend the victim's money for days. Is that what you call losing control? Diana replied briefly. When you're scared, you do stupid things. A juror, a middle-aged woman in the front row, leaned down to jot something in her notes. Simmons noticed, softening her tone, but keeping it sharp. You say your mother made you feel small, oppressed. Did that give you the right to take her life? Diana shrugged slightly. No one understands what I went through. So you thought your mother deserved to die? I thought she shouldn't have made things so bad. The statement silenced the courtroom. No pen scratched. No cameras clicked. Only Simmons' voice echoed, slow and clear. Miss Moore, this isn't the act of someone who lost control. This is the act of someone who lost their humanity. Diana looked up, her eyes unwavering. Her smile widened slightly, as if the accusation was meant for someone else. Simmons returned to the prosecution table, closing her file, saying no more. Judge Callahan called a recess to restore order. As he left the bench, many still stared at Diana, the woman who spoke of her mother's death, as if recounting a distant memory. In the press row, reporters scribbled brief lines. She isn't afraid, nor remorseful, only absolute coldness. As court staff cleared papers, Diana turned, catching the gaze of her son Michael in the front row. She didn't look away, only tilted her head slightly, her smile intact. The image unsettled spectators more than any words. For them, that day's confrontation didn't just reveal the case's truth. It showed something more terrifying, the composure of a person standing between justice and crime, no longer sensing the boundary between the two. On the fifth day, Judge Edward Callahan opened the witness testimony phase. The courtroom remained packed, but the atmosphere was quieter, heavier than previous days. This was the day those who knew Evelyn Moore would share their stories, piecing together the portrait of the murdered woman and the daughter who took her life. The first witness called was Michael Grant, the victim's grandson and the one who reported her missing. He took the stand with a calm demeanor, but a tense face, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. When prosecutor Laura Simmons asked about family dynamics, Michael hesitated briefly, then said, My grandmother and my mother didn't get along. Grandma cared for me, for my daughter, but my mother always thought she interfered too much. He recounted frequent small arguments between them, mostly about money and childcare. Grandma was frugal. She didn't like how Mom spent money, he said. His voice catching, I think Mom was tired of being reminded. But I never imagined this. When asked about the days before Evelyn's disappearance, Michael described the events leading to his 911 call. He had tried contacting her multiple times with no response. Then he received a text from her phone. I'm fine, don't worry. I knew it wasn't her, Michael said, his voice trembling. Grandma didn't text like that. She always called, never short messages. He added that when he called back, his mother, Diana, answered, saying Evelyn was away for a few days and didn't want to be bothered. Michael looked directly at the defendant. "I wanted to believe Mom, but when I went to the house and everything was too quiet, I knew something was wrong." Simmons asked, "When you called the police, did you suspect anyone?" Michael took a deep breath. "I suspected my mother. I didn't want to believe it, but in my heart, I knew only one person was with her that night." The statement silenced the courtroom. Diana sat motionless, not looking at her son, only tilting her head slightly, her lips forming a faint smile. A reporter captured the moment, writing in the evening news, while her son choked back tears, recounting how he had to report his mother. The defendant maintained a calm smile, as if watching a stranger. The next witness was Margaret Hill, a neighbor who lived across from Evelyn's house for over a decade. She described Evelyn as kind, always helping others, especially elderly neighbors. "She was the most generous person I knew," Hill said, her voice emotional. "But in recent years, I saw her and Diana argue often. I didn't know why, just heard them shouting in the yard." Evelyn cried, and Diana slammed the door. She vividly recalled the night of November 18th, the night of the murder. "Around 8 o'clock, I heard a loud noise, like something falling. I thought about checking, but assumed it was minor. Now I wish I'd crossed the street right then." A close friend of the victim, Helen Saunders, was also called to testify. She recounted that a few weeks before her death, Evelyn confided her concerns about Diana's future. "She told me Diana couldn't manage money and often used health issues as an excuse to ask for funds. Evelyn started talking about transferring most of her assets to her granddaughter," Saunders said. "She was afraid it would anger Diana, but she said, 'It's time she takes care of herself.'" Prosecutor Simmons asked further, "Did you notice anything unusual about Evelyn at that time?" Saunders nodded. "She was tired. Maybe not just from age," she said. "The house no longer felt peaceful." Next were two other witnesses, Tom and Linda Weber, family friends who often helped with home repairs for Evelyn. Tom recalled overhearing Diana say to her mother, "If you don't trust me, I'll leave, and you'll have to manage alone." When asked about their relationship, he replied, "It was like a rope stretched too tight, just waiting to snap." Throughout the morning, as witnesses took the stand, Diana sat upright, her expression calm. She never looked down, showing no emotion. Each time her name was mentioned, her lips twitched slightly. A Columbus Dispatch reporter described, "Her demeanor chilled the room more than the crime scene photos." In the afternoon, the prosecution called Patricia Moore, Evelyn's sister, to testify. She lived in Cleveland and was the last person to speak with the victim over the phone a week before the crime. Evelyn said she felt isolated in her own home, Patricia testified. She said Diana was no longer the daughter she once knew. When asked about Diana's reaction after her sister's disappearance, Patricia replied, "She didn't ask questions or seem worried. When I called, she just said everything's fine and hung up. I knew from her voice something was wrong." The prosecution concluded the witness testimonies by displaying an old family photo, Evelyn, Diana, and Michael together at Christmas 2006. In the image, Evelyn sat in the center, smiling warmly. Diana stood behind, hand lightly on her mother's shoulder. The photo brought many in the gallery to bow their heads. When the screen went dark, Diana remained composed, tilting her head slightly, that faint smile reappearing on her lips. Judge Callahan called for a recess, but no one in the room stood immediately. The witnesses' accounts had brought Evelyn Moore to life, a devoted mother, a kind woman, and a victim of a crime committed by her own flesh and blood. At the defendant's table, Diana sat unmoved by the pain of those around her, as if the entire trial were a performance where she alone knew the script. On the sixth day of the trial, the courtroom atmosphere grew thick. Gone were the murmurs and camera clicks. Everyone knew this morning's closing arguments from the prosecution could decide the case. As Judge Edward Callahan opened the session, Prosecutor Laura Simmons stood, walking slowly to the podium, with a thick file marked by dozens of yellow sticky notes. She paused, scanned the jury, then looked at the defendant. Diana Moore sat upright, hands clasped on the table, her face nearly expressionless. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Simmons began, her voice calm and weighty. "We have spent 6 days examining what happened at 2145 Brookfield Drive. 6 days watching the truth emerge, detail by detail, and all lead to one inescapable conclusion. Diana Moore intentionally killed her mother, Evelyn Moore, to seize her assets and control her life." She moved to the screen, displaying the first image, the plastic container in the garage where Evelyn's body was found. "This was not an accident," she said. "No one hides the body of someone they love out of panic. No one cleans blood, sends fake texts, and continues withdrawing money from the victim's account if it was a mistake." Simmons listed each piece of evidence, the receipt for the container, knife and bleach, purchased on November 15th. The store surveillance video, the tape with Diana's DNA, the bank account withdrawals after the victim's death, and the forged emails sent from Diana's computer. Each detail was a stone placed precisely, forming a complete picture of a deliberate, calculated crime. "She didn't just kill the mother who gave her life," Simmons continued. "She tried to live as her mother, sending text from her phone, replying to friends' emails, and using her money as if she were still alive. This is an act of control, a display of power, a person who wanted to dominate everything, even death." She paused, looking at Diana. "Everything we've seen doesn't come from a loss of control. It comes from coldness and confidence, the traits of someone who believes they're above the law." Simmons turned to the jury, her voice stronger. "Miss Moore had many chances to stop. After the first shot, she could have called for help. She didn't. While Evelyn was still breathing, she chose to stab her twice more. Then she took time to clean the floor, wrap the body, and store it in a container. That's not panic, that's order. The order of a crime." The next image showed a bank statement, withdrawals highlighted in bold, Simmons said. While the community worried about Evelyn Moore's disappearance, her daughter was withdrawing her money at an ATM blocks away. "We're not talking about a moment of lost control, but 2 months of continuous deceit." She addressed the defendant's demeanor throughout the trial. "Over these days, you've seen her, sitting there, silent, occasionally smiling. Not a smile of remorse, but of defiance. She smiled at crime scene photos, when her son recounted reporting his own mother, and even when I said her name, that's not remorse. That's self-satisfaction." Simmons paused, her voice slow. "A remorseful person bows their head. Miss Moore lifts hers and smiles." Some in the gallery glanced at the defendant. Diana sat unmoved, her face unchanged. When Simmons mentioned smiling, her lips twitched slightly, as if proving the point. The prosecutor continued, softer, almost analytical. "Some ask why a daughter could do this to her mother. I believe the answer lies in Diana Moore, no longer seeing her mother as a person, but as an obstacle, a symbol of control she wanted to erase. Killing her wasn't just violence. For her, it was liberation from the one person who ever said no to her." She faced the jury directly. "This wasn't a murder born of anger or fear. It was a murder for power. She wanted money, absolute freedom, and was willing to destroy anyone in her path, even the one who gave her life." Simmons' closing argument lasted nearly 40 minutes, interwoven with images, witness quotes, and verified evidence. As she delivered her final sentence, her voice slow and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, justice cannot change the past, but it can protect the future. And that future must be protected from those who believe they can kill and smile their way out of a courtroom." The room fell completely silent. Simmons bowed to the jury and returned to her seat. Judge Callahan made a brief note before calling a recess. In that moment, Diana looked up, scanned the courtroom, and smiled again. That faint, inscrutable smile. Reporters raised their cameras in unison. That afternoon, the image dominated local newspaper front pages with near-identical headlines. "Defendant's smile as prosecutor delivers, closing chills courtroom." From then on, the phrase "the self-satisfied smile" became the case's emblem. It spoke not only of Diana Moore's demeanor, but of the dread Columbus faced. A person could kill their mother, hear their crime recounted, and still smile as if they alone understood the game. On the seventh day, the Franklin County courtroom was heavy with tension. All morning, the jury was sequestered in deliberation to reach a verdict. Outside, reporters and residents waited in silence, only the sound of pens and footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. No one knew how long deliberations would take, but all felt the outcome was inevitable after the week's evidence. Judge Edward Callahan sat at his bench, calm, while prosecutor Laura Simmons quietly reviewed documents, avoiding the defendant's table. Diana Moore, in a beige prison uniform, sat upright, hands clasped. She said nothing, asked nothing, occasionally glancing at the wall clock, her expression blank. When the court clerk announced the jury had reached a verdict after over 4 hours, the room fell silent. The 12 jurors returned, their faces tense. The foreperson held a signed, sealed paper. Judge Callahan requested the verdict. The foreperson's voice trembled slightly, but was clear. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Diana Moore, guilty. On the charge of abuse of a corpse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of financial fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Each time guilty was uttered, the clerk's pen scratched audibly in the silent room. Diana showed no reaction, no sobs, no tears, no surprise. She only tilted her head slightly, as if listening to a familiar old story. When the foreperson finished, she smiled, a faint, fleeting smile, but enough to chill many in the gallery. Judge Callahan looked up, his gaze cold and stern. He stood, holding the final judgment. His voice was slow, weighty. Diana Moore, you have been found guilty of killing your mother, Evelyn Moore, who gave you life and raised you. Your actions are not just a criminal act, but the deepest betrayal of human values. You didn't just take a life, you tried to erase her identity, impersonate her, and profit from her death. He paused, looking directly at the defendant. Diana maintained her smile, meeting his gaze. Callahan continued, "This court has witnessed your demeanor throughout the trial. Coldness, emptiness, an absence of remorse. I've sat on this bench for many years, but rarely have I seen someone face evidence and consequences while smiling, as if untouched by it all." He set the judgment down, hands clasped. Justice is not a game, and your smile cannot hide the truth. After his remarks, he delivered the sentence. For the crimes determined, the defendant, Diana Moore, is sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His gavel struck the bench 3 times, echoing through the room. No one spoke. Some in the gallery wept. Others clasped hands. At the prosecution table, Laura Simmons bowed her head, eyes briefly closed. Across the room, defense attorney Robert Klein stared at the table, silent. Diana sat still, eyes on the judge. As he finished, her lips curved into a slight smile, a defiant, alien response. No fear, no sense of defeat, just the smile of someone believing themselves untouched by the world. 2 officers approached, cuffing her hands. She didn't resist, only said softly, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "It's finally over." Judge Callahan watched her, his voice lowering. "Miss Moore, some die once when their body stops breathing. Others died long ago, in their soul, in their humanity. You are the latter. You were a dead soul before you committed this crime." His words echoed in the silent room. A reporter jotted them down, and they later became the evening news headline, "A soul dead before the crime." As officers led Diana from the courtroom, the crowd parted, camera flashes relentless. She walked calmly, head slightly raised, face expressionless. At the hallway's end, before turning to the basement where the transport van waited, she glanced back at the courtroom one last time. For a moment, her lips curved again, that familiar, cold smile, devoid of human warmth. With the final gavel strike, the trial closed. A nearly 2-year journey, from the murder to the sentencing, reached its end. But what lingered wasn't the thick case files or intense arguments. It was the image of a woman at the defendant's table, hearing her verdict, and smiling, as if it were all part of her plan. In that moment, Diana Moore's arrogance, which had defined the case, was defeated not by anger or hatred, but by the cold, resolute justice of the court. After the sentencing, the Diana Moore case became Columbus's most haunting criminal story, not just for the mother-daughter relationship, but for the chilling image of a woman who killed her mother and smiled in court. For weeks after the trial, local media ran analyses, expert interviews, and accounts from Brookfield Drive residents, once a peaceful neighborhood where no one imagined crime. From that day, Brookfield took on a new meaning, tied to fear and the memory of a smile no one could forget. The house where the crime occurred was sealed for months for further investigation and forensic review. When the process concluded, the property was returned to Evelyn's relatives, but no one wanted it. The pale yellow wooden door peeled, weeds overgrew the path, and old curtains remained drawn, as if guarding the house's secrets. No one dared live there. Neighborhood children whispered that passing by at night, you could see lights flickering from the garage, where the body was found. Adults dismissed ghosts, but they too avoided the house after dark. Over time, it earned a simple, chilling name, the Smile House. The name didn't just evoke the crime scene, but the smile of its perpetrator, a haunting, meaningless smile. Local papers like the Columbus Dispatch and 10 TV News ran special features titled The Smile That Haunted Columbus. A veteran journalist wrote, "In my career, I've seen many crimes, but never someone faced justice with a smile like that. It wasn't defiance, but a void of someone who lost all connection to humanity." From this story, Columbus began discussing deeper issues, the dehumanization in modern society. TV programs, psychology seminars, and criminology students used the case as a prime example of moral apathy syndrome, when someone believes they're above others' rules and values. One paper wrote, "Diana Moore didn't kill out of hatred. She killed to prove she could." Prosecutor Laura Simmons, who worked the case for nearly 2 years, became a familiar face. In a final interview before closing the file, she spoke slowly, eyes weary. "I've met many defendants, but none like her. No remorse, no fear, no need to justify. A crime not from anger or hatred, just to prove she was above everyone." She closed the nearly 400-page file, marking the final line in red ink, "Case closed. Permanent incarceration." The Diana Moore case also changed how Columbus viewed family safety. In suburbs, people grew more vigilant, and community meetings discussed domestic violence and mental health. The church Evelyn attended weekly erected a small memorial plaque in its garden, inscribed in loving memory of Evelyn Moore, "Kindness endures." Each Christmas, neighbors brought white tulips, her favorite flower, to the site. As for Diana, she was transferred to the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville. Prison reports noted she lived quietly, rarely spoke, caused no trouble, and followed rules. But one thing guards mentioned in internal meetings: she always smiles. One guard recalled that each morning during roll call, Diana would look up, nod slightly, and give that faint smile, identical to her courtroom expression. "It's not a happy smile," the guard said. "It's like she knows something we don't." Occasionally, reporters or criminology students sent interview requests, but Diana declined them all. The only response they received, written in neat handwriting, was, "I have nothing to say. Everyone has their own story." That reply deepened her mystique, making her smile a symbol of punished arrogance, a woman who believed she controlled the narrative, now a minor character in her own verdict. 12 years after the case closed, the Smile House remains abandoned. Weeds obscure the windows, peeling paint reveals rotting wood. Locals say on windy nights, you can hear the garage door creaking open, as if the house still breathes, slow, heavy, and alone. No one approaches. A family once considered buying it, but backed out upon learning it was the House of the Smile. Diana Moore's story is no longer just a murder case. It's a reminder of the fragile line between family and power, love and possession. The veteran journalist who first covered it later said at a panel, "What terrifies isn't the crime, but the indifference that came with it." In Marysville Prison, Diana Moore lives as before, orderly, quiet, always with that unyielding smile. Perhaps she no longer knows why she smiles. That smile, once a symbol of confidence, became evidence of apathy, and finally an indelible mark of a soul that lost itself. For those who remember, it's the smile that chills them when they hear the name Diana Moore. A woman who proved evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it just smiles. The story of Diana Moore, the woman who killed her mother and smiled in court, is not just a personal tragedy, but a reflection of deeper issues in American society today. A nation that champions individual freedom, yet sees growing cases of isolation, family fractures, and silent mental health crises. Diana didn't kill out of poverty or hatred. She killed to prove she could, driven by a sense of lost control and a warped belief that personal power trumped all moral bonds. Her forged texts, withdrawals from her mother's account, and smug courtroom smile were extreme expressions of a broader malaise, apathy, and loneliness masked by the calm of modern life. In today's America, where people often live disconnected, interacting more through screens than eyes, family bonds erode under financial pressures, expectations, and emotional distance. Diana's story reminds us that coldness doesn't begin with crime, but with ceasing to listen to one another. If Evelyn and her daughter could have talked, if their community had noticed signs of strain and depression, the tragedy might have been avoided. The lesson for America today is that freedom doesn't mean isolation, and strength lies not in controlling others, but in understanding and loving them. When empathy is forgotten, all material achievements become meaningless, and smiles like Diana Moore's will keep emerging as warnings of the chill within souls in a seemingly warm society. Thank you for following this story to the end. A reminder that evil sometimes doesn't roar, it quietly smiles. Subscribe to the channel to not miss other true crime stories, where justice always finds a way to silence the smiles of the guilty.